It is really a joy to be here. It is a joy to hear what everyone is saying. And it is a joy to be a part of this movement. I come here a little bit under the weather, as some of you may know, having had a bad case of the flu a couple weeks ago and then some asthma triggered by that flu. And I almost didn't come, feeling like there was no way I could actually prepare for this amazing summit. But at the end I decided I needed to come just to be here, just to bear witness, just because this is what democracy looks like, and this is how we fight back. And if we come away from today with nothing more than the commitment to stay together, to be together, to know that what we did in the last election was not just okay, it was absolutely essential. It was world-saving. It is the way forward. This is what we must do. And the fact that they continue to blame us and to try to, to smear us for having challenged empire and oligarchy and genocide, the fact that they will not let up is absolutely the affirmation of our lasting impact and the fact that we must keep up this fight. In our minds, it's really important to invert the smears when they come at you. It should be an affirmation. It should be seen as a badge of honor. It should be seen as a confirmation that what we do absolutely matters. So I say, bring it on. Keep those smears coming. Keep us relevant. So we are very much here, and I want to thank everyone here virtually and in the room who's here to take back power from the billionaires and their two parties that serve them, and to put power into the hands of working people. So we continue the momentum of our pro-worker, anti-war, anti-genocide, climate emergency, to demand an America and a world that works for working people, which is the only world that works for all of us. And it's important to know that that world in many ways is closer than it has ever been, because empire and oligarchy are indeed unraveling right now before our very eyes. They are collapsing in front of us. Empire is falling, we are rising, and this is unstoppable. So it's really critical, above all, to reject the propaganda that tells us that we are powerless, that resistance is futile. So many of us right now, a recent poll, even before the shit started hitting the fan, something like 72% of Americans were tuning out of politics in the wake of the last election, the 24 election. 72%, according to polls, are tuning out because politics has become so toxic, so distasteful. And that is true, but it cannot stop there. We have to seize the moment. This is that perfect storm for speaking to the vast majority of Americans right now who are in revolt. They've just been denied a framework in which to unite that revolt. And that is what we are doing here today and with this Workers' Strike Back movement. So I encourage everyone to become a part of it if you are not already. Their resistance, their continuing smears against us, tells us that they, in fact, are terrified. They are terrified because they know that their days are numbered and they know that we are getting together. That is why they pulled out all the stops during our campaign. Their army of lawyers, their infiltrators and spies, which they publicly advertised for, their delay in our public funding, which kept us off the ballot in several states because we were not able to pay the costs of getting on the ballot where those deadlines were missed. The fact that they created a war room of constant lies and smears to disparage and suppress our campaign. That war room cost more than the entire cost of our whole campaign. So that tells you, what the terms were. They were terrified. Over 1/3 of eligible voters are not voting because they reject these toxic candidates and political parties being rammed down our throats. And who are those 1 out of every 3, more than 1 out of every 3 eligible voters who don't vote? They are largely people of color, low income, and youth. Exactly the people who benefit from the agenda that we propose. So this is a meltdown of empire, a meltdown of duopoly, and it is on the verge of that transformation to a people-powered politics. This is the American public, where, where 68% of Americans, last they asked, wanted an immediate ceasefire and an end to the genocide, where over 60% want a shutdown of all military aid to Israel. This is astounding. This is not so much a problem of a misinformed public. This is a problem of a public which is denied representation. We have an anti-democratic government, is what we have, both political parties. And as said earlier, Trump is a symptom. He is not the disease itself. He is part of the disease, but he is not the driver of that disease. He is a symptom of it. That disease is wreaking havoc on every dimension of our lives. It was, some months ago, it was said to be over 60% of Americans who are living paycheck to paycheck. Well, now that is over 2/3. It's now over 66% of Americans. Over half of Americans are now struggling to pay their rent, paying more than 30 or even 50% of their monthly income just to keep a roof over their heads. Meanwhile, the rate of homelessness is absolutely unprecedented. Last year, the number of homeless increased by 18% in 1 year alone. That's on top of a 12% increase the year before. 100 million people are strapped in medical debt, 44 million in student debt. Half of youth say that they are hopeless about the future. 1 in 4 have considered harming themselves within 2 weeks of the poll alone because of how desperate they are about the condition of their lives. This says really more than anything that what is being imposed on us by the parties of oligarchy, by the corporate duopoly, is absolutely unsustainable, unforgivable, and it will not stand. Do not be fooled for a minute. We've all been kind of knocked off of our feet by this incredibly rapid assault, one thing after another. We're not sure how critical each attack is. Where are we to turn our attention before we've observed, before we have even come to terms with the last hit? There are 5 more the next day. So this is really designed to keep us on our back feet, to keep us basically falling over. But in fact, do not be fooled into thinking that there is support for the oligarch agenda. Elon Musk himself, who people initially were favorable towards, even within the Republican Party now, he has become an absolute anathema. And there's overwhelming disapproval of Elon Musk and of his having any influence whatsoever in our government. The same is true for Trump's other policies. There was support. It wasn't overwhelming, but there was support across the board. Now that has pretty much gone, except on the issue of deportations, where the Democrats shared with the Republicans this pack of lies that really persuaded the American people, shamefully, into thinking that immigrants are the cause of greater crime, are the cause of the drugs coming into this country. It's actually the opposite. Immigrants are far safer, are far more community, family, and job oriented. Immigrants are not the problem. The problem is the US policies that have created wave after wave of migration. That is where the migration crisis must be solved. The most critical thing we can do to solve the migration crisis is to simply stop causing it in the first place through endless wars, regime change, through economic sanctions that are driving people to indexation. And you'll notice that while Trump did not talk whatsoever, not in his inauguration and not since, has not talked about the real crises facing American people, of homelessness, of the lack of health care, of the skyrocketing cost of housing, of debt. While Trump hasn't talked about it, the Democrats don't talk about it either. And Kamala Harris, in her campaign, had absolutely no solutions to offer. And when she was asked, what was she going to do? Well, she was basically going to do more of Joe Biden, except that she would be different by appointing a Republican to her cabinet. That's how she was going to distinguish herself. Donald Trump, has been overwhelmingly funded by billionaires. And the statistic to drive that home is the fact that 44% of the money supporting Trump's campaign came from 10 people. Donald Trump represents 10 people and a few others. That is what this is about. This is about a massive propaganda campaign. This is about manufactured consent. Do not believe for a minute that the American public is being fooled. And I will say that the latest polls showed that there is no longer majority support. Initially, it was, modest support across the board for all of what Trump was doing. Now he has basically lost that support, and he is in the negative. He's actually in the disapproval rating now on everything except for deportation, where there is still, a lot of lasting confusion after years of bipartisan propaganda. But on all the other issues, on tariffs, on the taxes and so on, there is no longer support on Elon Musk. There is no longer support for the Trump agenda, and in fact, he is running in the negatives now. He had the worst average approval, the worst average polling of all presidents since the Second World War. There is not support. And the second worst was, who? It was Joe Biden, which tells you that both of these parties are not representing us. They are not representing the American people who are hungry, who are desperate. A couple more quick mentions. There's so much outrage right now about the proposed Trump cuts, particularly to Medicaid and to food stamps, to SNAP. But actually the cuts that he is proposing are smaller than the cuts that were made by Joe Biden during his presidency. Shame. It was 24 million people who were thrown off of Medicaid by Joe Biden, and it was approximately 4.5 million people were thrown back into poverty after Joe Biden's cuts to SNAP. And further, Joe Biden ended the pause on student debt payments, which impoverished millions of people and continue to impoverish millions of people. There was no need for him to do that. He did that purely on his own voluntary basis, to throw American youth and Americans of all ages, actually, back into student debt poverty. So shame on all of them. And same agendas exactly. And another fascinating statistic came out just the other day, that the Democratic Party now has the lowest public approval ranking since the question has ever been asked. They now stand at approximately 31% in massive disapproval. So this is, above all, do not let this emergency be hijacked, because that is what they are trying to do right now. That is what Bernie Sanders is doing. That is what AOC is doing. That's what all of them are doing, is saying, see, look how bad Trump is, put us back in power. But what exactly are they doing? What they're doing, I think, is best summarized by Hakeem Jeffries, if you saw the clip of him that went viral, asking, well, what is it we can do? I'm trying to figure out what we can do. It's their government. That is the problem. It's not their government, it's our government. And we need to throw all of it out. So, to respond to Hakeem Jeffries about what can we do, let's see, actually, all right, let me just jump back for a minute. This slide really tells you what the driver is here. You know, the American public is tired. Working people are tired. They're tired of being thrown under the bus. They've been thrown under the bus for decades. And the Democrats showed us where they stood back in, what was it, in the 1990s with the passage of NAFTA, then again with the Wall Street bailouts, where Wall Street was bailed out to the tune of trillions, while millions, some 8, 9, 10 million American families were thrown out of their homes. Then you also had, you know, the Clinton crime bill and all that. So after a while, people gave up on the Democrats. In this latest election, some were fooled into turning to the Republicans, thinking that, well, maybe Donald Trump was going to do it, but they are rapidly waking up to the fact that, no, he is still throwing people even faster, or at least as fast, let's put it that way, under the bus. So this is very alarming to the Democrats, and I think that's why they are coming out again now, reinvigorating their smear campaign against us, because they know that people are hungry. And we came out of the election as the #1 people-powered alternative to challenge the parties of ruling Wall Street. We must fight at the level of our communities. We must fight at the level of social movements. We must fight for a $25 an hour minimum wage, for Medicare for all, for social housing and the right to housing, and an end to student debt. But we must also challenge power. And I agree, we don't want to predominantly focus on running a gazillion elections, but challenging power strategically and in flagship campaigns is an absolutely critical part of continuing to build our power. So I do want to encourage people to strategically fight. We are still here. I encourage you, if you're not already part of a Green Party chapter or a Socialist Party chapter, please join one and be a part of this fight. We do have a Green Party table here today. I hope you'll visit it downstairs afterwards. But this is really the driver here, where you are looking at basically, if you see the tiny red line on the bottom, that is the bottom 90%. That's the income level of most people. And it hasn't budged. It hasn't budged over decades. And that chart runs from 1960 to 2012. So you can be sure it looks even worse than that now, because billionaires and the super wealthy have doubled and tripled their wealth starting in the COVID pandemic, and that has continued. And the steep green swath at the top, which is spiking up and keeps going inevitably upward, that is the top. That is the income of the 0.01%. That is 1/100th of 1% has a massive amount of the income. So this is the driver here. As Louis Brandeis, a Supreme Court justice back in the day when they had some integrity, his famous saying was, we have a choice between vast concentrations of wealth or democracy. We can't have both, but this country has very clearly thrown its weight behind the vast concentrations of wealth. If you compare us to other countries around the world, I don't know if we are number one, but we are very, very close to the top. People often talk about Mexico as being, corrupt, as being a third world type, economic structure. They now have public financing of their elections. They also have an equal playing field in media. All media coverage has to be equalized. If you are running for their presidency, you cannot buy media coverage in Mexico. Let's take a lesson from Mexico. If you could go to the next slide, please. This is basically just another way to show. This shows wealth. The last one showed income. This shows wealth. That little orange line on the bottom, that's 50% of the population has 2% of the wealth. That's not very much. The top 1% is that bracketed area up there. 1% has 30% of the wealth, whereas half the population has to divide up 2%. So this is the driver. The rejection of the Democratic Party is not new. The rejection of the Republican Party is not new. What's new is that people are dropping out rather than vote for either of them. So this is really a perfect storm for change. And if you can go to the next slide, and this again, on that other issue about taxes, you'll see that quote on the bottom. Obama passed a larger tax cut than Trump's tax cut. Well, actually, Obama didn't pass it. He just made the Bush tax cuts permanent. So even on that issue of tax giveaways to the super wealthy, that is not just an issue of the Republicans. It's the Democrats as well. They are both 100% bought and paid for. And the next slide, you can go to the next one. That's just showing how money in politics is absolutely skyrocketing. It's off the charts. And the next one. All right, this here is the point I wanted to get to. This is that answer to Hakeem Jeffries. Be like the parliament of South Korea that turned out by the thousands within minutes. It was announced, martial law was announced in South Korea on December, I don't know what it was, 3rd or 4th, something like that, at like 10 p.m. at night. It was immediately live streamed and went out on social media. And within hours, there were 16,000 people there to help the parliamentarians scale the closed fences that had been closed around Parliament, because they knew that they had to respond to this declaration of martial law. They had to respond quickly or the noose would tighten. Because along with this declaration of martial law was the prohibition against the meeting. Even the meeting of Parliament was disallowed. Press was disallowed. Labor actions were disallowed. Everything was disallowed. So they knew they had to shut it down. And that's what they did. Within hours, they had scaled the fences. The troops were actually helicoptered in to inside of the fences. They helicoptered troops in, but before they were able to do that, the South Korean people were there. They were there in huge numbers, and you can show the next slide. These are the staff who also scaled the walls, the parliament staffers who scaled walls, and they used couches to block the doors so that the troops could not get in. This was like a January 6th in reverse, with masses of people turning out. And you can show the next slide as well. Everyday people were there to talk to the soldiers. They were there to persuade them. And in fact, the soldiers then did a very slow walk, and they went out to get noodles before enforcing their orders. So, again, it's to make the point that we do have the power in this country right now. We have an overwhelming opportunity. Do not be frightened. And, As one of the people who ran into the struggle, along with Jason Call and others of our staff who were at Washington University when the students were striking, we had taken a moment to go take a bathroom break, and in that moment, the police were attacking. So we went running back to the lineup, and they were coming for us. They came for us. And these soldiers, these police who've now been trained by the IDF, the Israeli occupation forces, who are now in the business through the cop cities all around the country of training our local police forces, are being trained in the tactics of the Gaza genocide. Police are vicious. I mean, there are many people who've encountered police for a long time who know how vicious this is. So you do have to use some discretion about when you stand up and where you stand up, but we have to stand up. And one of the most important ways to stand up is by striking, is by withdrawing our labor, by supporting labor unions to do the same. And I want to also put in a plug for BDS, for Boycott, Divestment, and Sanction, and Alameda County right now is among many counties who have withdrawn their retirement funds. Alameda County just pulled out $32 million from Caterpillar and its terrific destructive equipment. It is only a matter of time. Israel and its genocidal war and its genocidal economy is on its last legs. People are leaving. Its economy is in tatters. It cannot carry out even a war against Hamas. Hamas has reconstituted. Volunteers have replaced those who were killed, but the Israelis are struggling. They are capable of a 7-day war. They are not capable of a 7-month war, not even against one country. Now they are quickly expanding this concept of the greater Israel into Lebanon, into Syria, who knows, perhaps into Egypt as well. But there are conflicts now that are active and others that are brewing. Israel cannot possibly sustain this without our tax dollars and ultimately our blood. Israel is going to need boots on the ground under Democrats. We reactivated the draft. Our names, the names and addresses and emails of our young people are all in the hands of the security state right now. Let them try to reactivate the draft, and that will certainly be the match that kindles an incredible opposition, because the opposition is already there. Israel cannot conduct genocide without us, and we do not consent. And the traction for that is with our elected leadership. We need to throw these bums out. We need to organize. We need to prepare for the general strike. And we need to run them out of office. Thank you all so very much. I look forward to working together. Our work has only just begun.
Thank you so much to